Welcome to The Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles people who are passionate about what they do for a living, what organization they belong to, or the community they are a part of. Here is your host, Dave Cunningham.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Over 5 months ago, I was invited to make a virtual presentation to a marketing group based in Ottawa. I was surprised at the geographical spread of those attending the session, and that's where I met my guest. He is based in Loans, a community on Scotland's west coast. He spent 31 years as a policeman, 7 in the security business, and is now building his own business as a life coach. In this episode, a conversation with Willie Nicol. Willie, welcome.
Thank you, Dave. It's a great pleasure to be here, and many thanks for the invitation.
Let's remind our listeners that we are recording this episode in September of 2022. Okay, so Willie, you're in Lone, Scotland. I'm here in Kingston, Ontario. So let's begin there. The technology we're using today, what does it mean to building a business, providing services in particular? It's a different form of networking. When we met at the presentation in April, there were folks from Ireland, the US, other parts of Canada, as well as Scotland. So let's take a minute and talk about what this kind of networking and its importance to you in your business.
Technology is wonderful. As I alluded to earlier, I'm a bit of a techno dinosaur, possibly an age thing. So when the pandemic struck and lockdown was enforced, my business, which mainly consisted of one-to-one face-to-face coaching, had to cease. I reached out to a friend in the IT industry, and he gave me a lot of help and support about doing Zoom calls as we are just now. And that immensely broadened my horizons, which meant that I could interact with people virtually anywhere on the planet, and have been fortunate enough to be able to do so.
So when you network and build a business, how are you networking? Are you just networking with clients? Are you networking with other people who are in your business?
When I set my business up some 4 years ago, with absolutely no business experience, I was advised by some friends that I should join networking groups, which at that time were face-to-face. So I dabbled in various networking groups, face-to-face meetings, travelled to them, met a lot of people, and gradually distilled it down into which ones were best for me. Again, when lockdown started, the face-to-face networking meetings obviously ceased, and many of the groups I joined went virtual online, and I continued my networking activities mainly via Zoom. But the beauty of online is that, as you alluded to, Dave, I met people from all over. So Ireland, the US, Canada, Europe, and even further afield. Mm-hmm. And I would never probably have done that had I remained in the face-to-face networking environment. So what I initially considered to be a curse turned out to be a blessing.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to wonder as to how this all developed when we went from face-to-face networking meetings for those people who were around us and in close proximity. And then we started talking to them virtually because of the pandemic. And then we made a jump somehow to include people who joined us from other countries and far off lands. Like that jump, I don't know who started that or how that evolved, but it made it really interesting.
One of the first networking groups I joined, and I'm still a member of, had a very charismatic, or has a very charismatic leader who is a great networker. And when we went online, he made it his business to branch out, initially probably from Scotland to the rest of the UK to Ireland, and he then decided why not spread it further afield. Mm-hmm. As a result of which I interacted with people from, as I said, the US, Canada, and various other places. And that was like a snowball effect, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
Through that group, I met other groups, and you alluded to the Ottawa group, where I was again introduced to other people and so on. So it kind of grew organically so that I was able to expand my network much more widely than I had done when we were still face to face.
Now, what I want to do now is go back a little bit, or maybe a long bit, to when you graduated from the University of Glasgow and you became a policeman. And as I mentioned before, you spent 31 years in that particular career. What was it about policing that you liked?
That's a very good question. Having graduated with a law degree from university, I struggled to find a place within a legal firm. At that time, you had to perform an apprenticeship. Regrettably, when I graduated, there were too many applicants for each job, and I found myself struggling. This situation was exacerbated by the fact that I was due to be married shortly thereafter, and I needed an occupation, a steady income. And it was suggested to me that I take my legal experience into the police service, which, to be brutally honest, wasn't my first choice.
Mm-hmm.
But with my sensible head on and pushed by my father and my soon-to-be father-in-law, they persuaded me that it was a good idea. Anyway, I joined the police, and not, again, to be brutal honest, not intending to remain within the service. But after my 2-year probation period, when I became a fully fledged police officer, I was enjoying it. I was enjoying the work, the challenge, and decided I'll give it a couple of years more. And lo and behold, 31 years passed till I had a service retiral. So I must have enjoyed it to the point where I didn't make any strenuous efforts to change careers.
Mm-hmm. What's a service retiral?
The service retiral is generally after 30 years. You perform your services for 30 years and then you're retired. I was slightly over that because I was performing a role for which they hadn't found a replacement. And I was persuaded to remain in situ until such times as they could find a suitable replacement for the role I was performing at the time. And 31 years seemed a good point at which to leave.
So you left there and you decided that you weren't going to stay retired, and you went and took a job with a firm that was in the security business.
That's correct. For a variety of reasons, personal mainly. I didn't want to retire and put my feet up. There were financial implications also. And I sought out another job, which by happenstance fell into my lap, so to speak, through a friend of a friend. And I joined a multinational cash management company as a regional security manager, corporate security, which was a big change from my policing career in terms of the culture of the organisation. The actual job was very similar to what I'd done in some areas of my police career. But private industry, as this was a bit of a culture shock compared to what I'd been used to in the police service.
So what did you do at this particular security firm?
This company, and I won't mention the name of it since we parted in less than amicable terms when they made me redundant, a multinational cash management company. And essentially, at that point, and this is pre-pandemic, pre-lockdown, they made a profit out of transporting and processing cash.
Okay.
So if you imagine your favourite restaurant, you go in for a meal, you pay them in cash, increasingly less so nowadays, but you pay them in cash, as did all the other guests. They had a big pile of cash sitting in their premises, which they didn't want there because it was a security risk.
Right.
So the company for which I worked had big armoured vans.
Okay.
They go to the restaurant, pick the cash up, take it away, credit the restaurant's account, and process that cash and recycle it into the monetary system. Now, extrapolate that restaurant by thousands. It could be pubs, it could be football clubs, it could be all sorts of organisations which dealt in cash. So it was a multi-million pound industry in the UK. And they also had operations throughout Europe, Canada, America, South America. So it was a huge company. But I only operated, for obvious reasons, within the UK area.
So in our parlance, you were laid off. You were declared redundant. They didn't need you anymore. So you're sitting at home and you're going, okay, well, I left the police force of my own volition, but it wasn't quite the same case when I left the security firm. So what's going through your head at that particular point as you're sitting around?
I had worked very hard for the security company, and I had resolved more or less all of the security issues in the area for which I was responsible. Robberies, thefts, project management. I had done it all, and everything was ticking over very nicely when my line manager, at the prompting of his line manager, with whom I'd had a falling out, decided that my role possibly wasn't required anymore since everything was ticking over nicely. And they raised the prospect that my role, not me personally, my role was no longer required. Mm-hmm. And the role, not me personally, would be made redundant. I could see the writing on the wall, Dave, and I wasn't a very happy individual. By coincidence, my wife, who had done coaching and coaching training, suggested to me that in the event I was made redundant, I look at coaching as a possible career.
And what was your reaction?
My reaction was one of, frankly, incredulity, because I didn't believe in coaching. I thought it was just so much mumbo jumbo. However, my wife was a very perceptive, intuitive lady, persisted to the point where she booked me on a short life coaching training course without my knowledge. And this was due to take place as the redundancy process was creaking on. Mm-hmm. I went to the course under sufferance, determined not to enjoy it, and to debunk the myth that coaching was a valid occupation. It was only 3 days, and by the end of the 3 days, I had changed my mind. Mm-hmm. I saw the value in it, and I realised that this was something that I could possibly consider doing.
I think your belief about coaching at the outset is a commonly held belief in terms of people considering coaching to be, in some respects, mumbo jumbo, but there are a lot of people who believe in it. There are a lot of people who get a lot out of it. And for a lot of people, it does change their lives. So as we start to move into a discussion about your career as a coach, I guess what I'd like to do sort of at the beginning is get some sense as to what sparked that change of mind when you were in that 3-day course that your wife arranged for you.
Well, I was kind of ambushed because she and the trainer were quite close, and she had explained to the trainer my predicament. And he used me as a sort of guinea pig example of how not to deal with the potential threat of a life-changing event, i.e. losing your job.
Yeah.
And when I looked at the way he described it, I realised that I didn't need to get angry, bitter and upset about this. There were other options available to me, other avenues to explore. And the more I thought about it, the more enthused I became that I could help other people in similar situations going through whatever it is they were going through to come out the end of the process in a better place.
Now, I'm thinking that as you are in this course and you are changing your mind and you're starting to think about what kind of role you can play with respect to other folks, I'm thinking that you're thinking back to your career as a policeman and as a security person and saying, okay, I've got some skills, some talents that I have developed over that 30 8-year period that I can use in this new position. What sort of skills did you think your previous work as a policeman or as a security person would be of benefit to you in this new job?
I came to realize, Dave, that many of the skills I'd acquired and the training I'd experienced were actually readily transferable to coaching. For example, listening skills, having an inquiring mind, asking the right questions, empathizing with the person in front of me, being able to communicate a reasonable level, and so on and so on. I didn't initially consider this. It was only when I'd been coaching for a short time that I realised all the skill sets I had in my previous careers, which I'd dismissed, frankly, were actually very valid. And one instance that proved that to me was meeting a former colleague of, many, many years standing, that I hadn't seen for probably 20 odd years. And I had been his tutor constable when he had joined. I was a few years in, I was his trainer.
Yeah.
And we bumped into each other purely by accident, not long after I set my coaching business up. And he asked me, "What are you doing in retirement?" And I said, "Well, actually, I haven't retired. I've set up a coaching business." At which point he laughed, which I thought was rather rude. And when I challenged him on this, he told me, and I remember it to this day, he said, "Willie, you coached me. I saw you coaching others, and you just didn't know you were doing it," which I took as a very backhanded compliment to say that you have chosen the correct career. And looking back, I realised he was exactly right. I had coached and helped other individuals, primarily in the police, but also in the security environment. And I really wasn't aware of what I was doing in those terms. So that was kind of vindication of my decision, so to speak.
When you decided to set up the coaching business, I don't know what it's like in the area that you occupy in Scotland in terms of the number of other coaches who are in business as you are. But at some particular point, like any business, you have to set yourself up as somebody who's different from somebody else so that you get some people knocking on your door to seek your assistance. So when you began, what sort of pitch did you make for your first clients?
My first client came to me by pure coincidence through that networking group I joined. And I had met someone at the networking group who contacted me, stating that she had someone who needed help and thought I'd be the right person to provide that help. The first client was a man, a bit younger than me, but of a similar outlook in life. And this lady had very shrewdly identified that we would be a good fit. I refined, if you like, my pitch, my offering by saying, "This is who I am, this is what I've been, these are the skills and expertise I possess," and take it from there. So things like authenticity and honesty and integrity are very important to me. And I say, this is what you'll get when you come and work with me. And it seems to have worked.
Let's give our listeners an example of some of the questions that you might ask of someone who comes to you. And we'll use the example of someone who has been declared redundant and who isn't quite ready to put his feet up, but does want to work, but doesn't know where to go from that particular situation. So you're sitting down with them. What sort of questions? Now, I guess I'm assuming that you will start off with questions.
Very much so. And by coincidence, I actually, lecture's probably too strong a word. I give presentations to retiring police officers through a pre-retiral system that the service has and offers to officers who are about to retire. And I attend these seminars where I present an input on what to do next, so to speak. I try to make it humorous. I generally start off by saying, don't make the same mistakes I did, which was not thinking about it, jumping into the first job I got, ending up not enjoying it, and so on and so forth. But if someone comes to me, and it has happened, they've been made redundant, I obviously ask questions, as I do of all my clients, because that's the only way I'll get a handle on where they are, what's troubling them, and where they want to get to. So in this case of someone who'd been made redundant, I would probably ask them, first of all, how are you feeling? Because I've been there, done that, and got the T-shirt. And once we've got the emotions out of the way, so to speak, and we're in a calm place, my second question, or a subsequent question, would be, what would you really like to do now? And I actually have a little guide that is designed to help people gain some clarity on where they go, what their next steps are. Because being made redundant is not a pleasant experience. The very word redundant is a very negative one. You are surplus to requirements. You are no longer needed. You are obsolete, so to speak. And that has a very negative connotation. And it's only natural that people become very upset about that. And once we have taken the upset away, we then look on, okay, what next? What do you want to do next? And we take it from there.
And there's the issue of being declared redundant, but there's also the implication of how old are you when you're being declared redundant, which is a whole other issue.
Very much so. I was 62 years of age. So I was 4 years away from, if you like, state retirement. I had obviously financial plans and things to achieve, and all of these were suddenly thrown into disarray, which can be quite overwhelming. I did consider rejoining the security industry. In fact, went to one interview in particular where I quickly realised that I knew more about the environment than the people who were interviewing me. And that's not to be big-headed. That was just the way it was.
Yeah.
And the thought popped into my head, I no longer want to be doing this.
Yeah.
So the next question I have to ask myself, what do you want to do? And that was when the coaching light bulb came back on again. And I warmed to the idea. I say to people who have retired or lost a job for whatever other reason, but still want to be gainfully employed, or whatever terminology you wish to use, what would you like to do next? What would make you excited to get out of bed in the morning? What would fulfill you? Job satisfaction is a very hackneyed phrase, but there's an element of truth in it.
Yeah.
What would you like to do that would make you fulfilled and give you job satisfaction? And that kind of triggers, Dave, a thought process within them. And I now know retired police officers who are in occupations which have nothing to do with policing or law enforcement. It's just that it's something they wanted to do, or it fulfills a need in them. And that can be, I know one retired officer who's now a postman, because he likes being out in the weather, and he likes delivering papers and newsletters and letters, whatever, and it gives him satisfaction.
Yeah.
So that's one example.
That's the whole point, is getting satisfaction. One of the things I asked you before we started talking to give me a few areas that you tend to focus on or specialize in. One of them was helping and support for anxiety and stress. And so we've talked a little bit about that as it relates to being declared redundant or getting into retirement. There's one that I was curious about, given the fact that we are recording this conversation in mid-September 2022, which is just a few days after the passing of Queen Elizabeth. And I've been watching a lot of the coverage on television, and I was amazed, and I guess I shouldn't be amazed, but a lot of people have been going through some major emotions as they think about this, or as they watch the parades that go by in the streets, or as they pass the coffin, those sorts of things. And I'm wondering if you have had any, I know it's early, but if you have had any sort of feedback from folks around you about that sort of thing, the stress or the anxiety?
Yes. I have to confess, despite being a rough, tough ex-policeman, to having been quite emotional when I heard the news. One of the reasons being that I actually stood next to the Queen during a royal visit in my capacity as a police officer. I was on protection duties. And for the 20 minutes or so, during which I saw her interacting with members of the public, I was blown away. Physically, she was a tiny woman, but she had an enormous presence. She radiated something that's inexplicable. And she also had an unerring ability to put people at their ease. So all of these awestruck members of the public who were presented to her or were in the vicinity of where she was were put at ease by her humour, her humility, for that matter. And obviously she had honed this over many, many years, but I was struck by it. I joined the police after swearing an oath to the Queen to uphold the peace. It's a long oath, which I won't repeat, but there was that element to it. And just, but probably by my background, I was pro-monarchy. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole other discussion.
Right.
So I was quite upset about it. The visible signs of outpouring, if you like, all the thousands and thousands of people who probably had never met the Queen, but knew exactly who she was and what she represented. So I only have a kind of personal knowledge of people around about me who have all been quite upset by this. And I haven't had anybody approach me and say, I require coaching in respect of it. But anxiety and stress is one area in which I wouldn't say I specialise, although I volunteer for a peer support group based in Toronto to moderate an anxiety and stress group, which is free at the point of entry, and I do that as a volunteer. Mm-hmm. The basic thing, Dave, is that anxiety and stress is always with us, to varying degrees. And as long as it's manageable, it's not affecting us negatively, it's okay. It's when it becomes unmanageable or chronic that people require help. And that's something that I provide.
Mm-hmm. What sorts of things would you do for someone who is going through a situation that is not manageable?
It very much depends on what the situation is. What is the catalyst or the stimulus for the anxiety and stress? For example, a couple of weeks back, we had some young ladies on that peer support group call done over Zoom who were studying. So these were young ladies who were at university and under pressure to have assignments done, exams, and all the other ramifications of education. And it's absolutely understandable that they were stressed and anxious. So one of my views, and this is a very bold statement, is you will only experience anxiety and stress if you let yourself experience it, because you have control over it. Easier said than done, I know that, but there are mechanisms and coping techniques, and you can find any number of them on Google, on YouTube: meditation, mindfulness, exercises, breathing exercises, physical exercises, all sorts of coping mechanisms, which are very useful. But get to the bottom of it. What is the stressor or the anxiety maker, and deal with that using these techniques and other methodologies which I use.
Now, because you mentioned before that you do have some networking, it's not really a networking, but you do moderate this panel based out of Toronto. You have clients in Scotland. I assume you have clients elsewhere. Do you find there is a difference from country to country in the sorts of things that you find your clients are going through, or does it matter where they live, or anxiety in Scotland is the same sort of thing as anxiety in Canada?
My experience is that it's global, if you like. It doesn't really matter where you live, albeit geographical location will have a bearing on it. For example, there is a war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and imagine that anxiety and stress levels in Ukraine are much higher than they are elsewhere. But that's a specific incident.
Yeah.
Across the board, anxiety and stress tends to be very similar. Like these young ladies who are at university, there'll be university students in various countries all going through the same sort of anxiety, stress, pain, whatever. I was at university. I know what it's like, albeit it was many, many years ago. Being made redundant, I don't think that will make any difference where in the world you had your job and was made redundant. The anxiety and stress, and dare I say, anger and bitterness and fear and worry will be the same. So it's a kind of constant. Yes, there will be local variations, but my experience is that it's sort of global. It's the same wherever you are.
I'm sort of thinking when it comes to the kind of work you do, if I can oversimplify things a little bit, and it's the opportunity for someone who needs a little help to simply sit down and talk with someone else and have that other person sort of guide them through decisions that they will then make on their own. Do you find a difference between men and women? Are men less likely to want to sit down and open themselves up to someone else?
That's almost a rhetorical question because much so. Funnily enough, it's been quite a while since I had a lady client, although I had quite a few to start with. It's just been by happenstance, the vast majority of my clients are men.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be the case they are drawn to me because I'm a man of mature years, have a lot of experience in a lot of different areas. I do promote myself as someone who values honesty, integrity, authenticity, confidentiality, whatever, as my kind of watchwords. So that may be one reason, or one of the reasons that men come to me. But I think this is, again, global. Men, particularly men of a certain age, are very reluctant to open up. The old adage, a problem shared is a problem halved, does not seem to have permeated into the male psyche because, for the very simple reason, they see that doing so, admitting they have a problem or an issue, is a sign of weakness and therefore not manly. And we probably would sooner cut our own arm off than admit to being not manly and weak. My view is that that's so much BS that opening up is the only way to explore and resolve whatever it is that's troubling them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you have dealt with folks who are transitioning from a long work life into retirement. What's the transition to retirement like for Willie Nicol?
I had no intention of working beyond state retirement age, which is when the state give you a pension based on the contributions you already made, yeah?
Is your 65, age 65 or 66?
It was 65. They've now put it back to 66, and I'm now past that. And I probably would have, had it not been for the redundancy incident, I probably would have quit at 66 and done, I don't know whether I'd done anything, to be frank. I don't play golf, so that wasn't an option. But I may just have stopped working. However, because of this fork in the road, so to speak, I have discovered a career, an occupation, a calling, vocation, whatever you want to call it, where I don't have to retire.
Mm-hmm.
As long as I'm still reasonably fit and healthy and able to contribute, I can carry on doing this for as long as I decide, which is kind of an eye-opener when you think about some times at work, you think, oh gosh, I wish I was finished with this, or I wish I could retire, or whatever. So I'm now in a place where I don't have to retire, I don't want to retire, and I won't retire.
Mm-hmm. I think too, being retired myself, finding something to do that you enjoy doing, whether you get paid for it or you don't get paid for it, still has a lot of benefits. And we all need something to keep the brain cells working as we move forward.
Very much so. Being active mentally and physically is very satisfying,
Mm-hmm.
and will keep you in good shape, so to speak. Unfortunately, when I was a young police officer, the mortality rate for retiring officers at that point, and I'm going back 40 years, was quite high. There was at one point, you had a 50-50 chance of surviving 2 years after retirement. I'm not sure why that was the case, but it was the case.
Mm-hmm.
I think nowadays people are much more aware of mental and physical health levels, if you like. And as long as you're fit enough and able enough mentally and physically to have a rich, fulfilling life, why not? My father, God rest him, who died fairly young, came up with a pithy comment, "You're a long time dead, son, so enjoy it while you can."
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's very, very basic. And at the time, and I was just a youngster at the time, I thought, what a lot of nonsense.
Yeah.
But the validity of that, and he didn't live to see that out, the validity of that still remains. You only have one go at it. It's not a dress rehearsal. Why not make the most of it?
Yeah. That's what you hear a lot more these days. I've enjoyed our conversation today. It's been a pleasure talking with you. And as I mentioned to you before we started recording, I have family who started off in your general neck of the woods in a little town called Saltcoats, which is, I think, north of where you are by 20 minutes or so. And so I tell you that if you ever get up to Saltcoats, tell any Cunninghams you run into that their Canadian cousin is thinking about them. Thanks again for your time today, Willie, and all the best going forward.
It's been my pleasure, Dave. Thank you very much.
Our guest in this episode has been Willie Nicol, a life coach based in Loans, Scotland. To those of you listening to the podcast, thank you, and we'll talk soon.
The theme music for the podcast is Stasis Oasis, written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of the episodes, please send a note to the KingstonianPodcast@gmail.com. For details on upcoming guests, follow us on Facebook. The Kingstonian Podcast is hosted by Dave Cunningham and produced in Kingston, Ontario, Canada.